Okay, so we hit a pretty crazy milestone recently in the world of solar.
Yeah.
Like a genuinely mind-blowing number.
Huh?
Global installed PV capacity, photovoltaics,
Yeah.
solar panels basically,
Right.
crossed the 1 terawatt mark last year.
Wow.
1 terawatt.
That's incredible.
1 trillion watts
Yeah.
of solar energy soaking up the sun all around the planet.
1 trillion watts.
It's, it really makes you step back and think how far we've come with this technology.
Absolutely. It really puts into perspective the scale of the progress we've made in solar.
And where we might be headed, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. That's the big question now, right?
Big question.
Where do we go from here?
And that brings us to our deep dive today.
Okay.
We are taking a look at a fascinating research paper published in Science,
Right.
very appropriately titled Photovoltaics at Multi-Terawatt Scale. Waiting is not an option.
No kidding.
And one thing that really stood out to me right away, just glancing at this thing,
Yeah.
was the sheer number of experts who contributed to this paper.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a who's who of the solar research world.
It speaks volumes about the consensus in the scientific community, right?
Absolutely. I think it underscores just how much attention and how much weight is being given to this topic of really scaling up solar to levels that we haven't even begun to imagine yet.
I mean, it's a global effort at this point.
It really is.
It has to be.
So for everyone joining us today, whether you're deep in the energy sector, prepping for some big meeting on the future of the grid, or just someone who, keeps up with the news, is interested in climate solutions, wants to understand this pivotal technology that is shaping our future.
Right.
Our goal today is pretty straightforward.
Exactly.
We're going to unpack the core arguments of this paper, photovoltaics at multi-terawatt scale. Waiting is not an option.
Okay.
And we're going to understand why these experts are so adamant that rapidly scaling up solar to multi-terawatt levels isn't just, a nice to have, but it's absolutely essential. So we'll do our best to skip the heavy technical jargon and really focus on the insights that matter.
Sounds good.
All right, so let's jump right in.
Okay.
Waiting is not an option. Even the title itself just screams urgency.
Yeah. It definitely grabs your attention.
What's driving that?
Well, despite that impressive 1 terawatt milestone we were talking about,
Yeah.
the paper points out that solar still only accounted for about 4 to 5% of global electricity generation in 2022.
Which is kind of wild to think about, considering how much solar you see going up everywhere.
Right. It feels like it's everywhere you look.
Yeah, exactly.
But globally, it's still a relatively small fraction.
Yeah, and when you consider the ever-shrinking window we have to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that fraction needs to increase, dramatically and quickly.
Exactly. We're in a race against time here.
Big time.
And this paper makes it very clear that large-scale rapid deployment of PV isn't just an option. It's one of the few realistic pathways we have for taking swift climate action.
Right. And they even go so far as to call PV a no-regrets option for the coming decade.
That's a powerful statement.
It is what's so significant about that phrase in this context.
Well, the brilliance of that no-regrets framing is that it really reframes the entire conversation.
Okay.
It's not about making a risky bet on a single technology. It's about making a fundamental investment in a flexible energy system.
Okay.
PV technology is mature.
Yeah.
It's readily available. And the costs keep plummeting.
That's right.
Even if some other, magical energy breakthroughs happen down the line.
Yeah.
All of this infrastructure and manufacturing capacity and the knowledge that we're gaining from deploying solar now.
Yeah.
Those will be invaluable assets no matter what the future holds.
So it's like building a foundation upon which we can then build all sorts of other things.
Exactly. A foundation for a truly sustainable energy future.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Now, the paper also talks about this growing consensus, and, a lot of experts are converging on this idea. That PV, combined with electrification and something called sector coupling, is really the key to decarbonizing at scale.
Right.
So can you kind of break those terms down for us?
Sure. So electrification in this context really just means switching away from directly using fossil fuels.
Okay.
And moving towards using electricity as our primary energy carrier.
Okay.
So this can be like, a direct switch.
Yeah.
Like swapping out your gasoline car for an electric vehicle.
Right.
Or replacing your gas furnace with an electric heat pump.
Makes sense.
But it can also be indirect.
Okay.
Like using clean electricity to produce hydrogen.
Okay.
Which can then be used in things like transportation or heavy industry.
Okay.
So it's really about electrifying as much of our energy use as possible.
Okay.
Now, sector coupling, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
This is about creating a smarter, more interconnected energy system.
Okay.
Think of it as your home appliances, talking to your solar panels, talking to your electric car. So if your solar panels are pumping out lots of power in the middle of the day,
Yeah.
your smart thermostat could pre-cool your house,
Okay.
or your car could start charging automatically,
Okay.
making the most of that clean energy when it's abundant.
Right. So it's not just about the supply of renewable energy. It's also about how we manage and use that energy more intelligently.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's about optimizing energy use across all these different sectors, transportation, buildings, industry,
Uh-huh.
to better match the natural ebb and flow of renewable energy generation.
So it's like a more adaptable, more dynamic energy ecosystem.
Exactly.
And the paper suggests that the potential benefits of this transition go beyond just cutting emissions.
Yeah.
It could actually lead to lower overall energy costs in the long run.
Right.
So it's not just good for the planet, it's good for our wallets too.
That's a crucial point because it reframes the whole debate about the cost of transitioning to clean energy.
It's not just about spending more, it's about investing smarter.
Exactly. And potentially saving money in the long term.
Now, the paper also raises a really critical concern.
Yeah.
This idea that we might be underestimating just how much solar PV we need to deploy in the near future.
Right.
Like, what are the consequences if we get those projections wrong?
The big risk is that we end up playing catch up.
Okay.
If we underestimate the amount of PV we need to deploy, say, leading up to 2035,
Yeah.
we might find ourselves in a situation where we need to ramp up manufacturing and installation at an unsustainable pace.
Okay, so it's not just about hitting a target. It's about hitting the target in a way that's actually feasible and doesn't create other problems down the line.
Exactly. We need to be strategic and proactive with this.
Okay, so we've talked about the urgency, the need for this rapid deployment.
Yeah.
But what kind of scale are we actually talking about here?
Right.
The paper mentions some pretty broad ranges for future projections.
Yeah, the projections vary quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
The paper points out that depending on which model you look at,
Uh-huh.
the estimated global PV installations by 2050 could range anywhere from 14 to 80 terawatts.
That's a huge spread.
It is a massive range.
Like, what accounts for such a wide variation in these predictions?
Well, it mostly comes down to the assumptions baked into these models.
Okay.
Different assumptions about future costs of various energy technologies,
Uh-huh.
different visions for how we're going to decarbonize.
Okay.
For instance, some of the lower end predictions might underestimate the continued rapid decline in PV costs,
Okay.
while maybe overestimating the near-term viability and cost-effectiveness of other technologies like nuclear power or carbon capture and storage.
So they might be kind of clinging to old assumptions or old ideas about how quickly these other technologies will develop.
Exactly.
Got it.
And it's not just about technology costs either.
Okay.
Some of those more conservative predictions might not fully grasp the huge increase in energy demand that's expected in the global south as economies develop.
Right.
Or they might be setting relatively limited goals for electrification across various sectors. Or they might be assuming a greater reliance on energy technologies that are more expensive or less readily scalable.
So they might be missing some key global trends that are going to drive energy demand up.
Yeah, they might not be fully accounting for the changing landscape.
So based on all of this analysis, where does the paper land in terms of a more realistic and ambitious target for PV deployment by 2050?
Okay, so after reviewing projections from multiple sources, the paper suggests that a more robust and climate-aligned target range is somewhere between 50 to 65 terawatts by 2050.
Wow, okay.
And that's before even considering the potential for PV to power chemical manufacturing processes.
Which is a whole other massive sector.
Exactly.
So to kind of put a stake in the ground, they propose a target estimate of 75 terawatts by 2050.
A nice round number.
Yeah, 75 terawatts by 2050. That's
It's ambitious.
it's a monumental undertaking.
Yeah, but the paper argues that it's achievable.
And they back that up with some pretty compelling data, right?
Right. They point to the historical growth of PV and the speed at which it's already transitioned from a negligible energy source to a major player in many power systems.
I think it's easy to forget just how quickly solar technology has advanced and been adopted.
Yeah, it's really been an incredible journey.
So the paper includes this really interesting data. I wish we could show it visually here.
Yeah.
But it basically illustrates the remarkable growth in PV's contribution to electricity grids across various countries and regions from 2010 to 2021.
Mhm.
And what's really striking is how some local grid systems achieved these record levels of PV penetration that were considered practically impossible just a few years earlier.
Right. It really shows the disruptive potential of this technology.
Yeah, but of course, scaling this up to the levels we're talking about,
Hmm.
integrating that much variable renewable energy into large power grids, that has to come with its own set of challenges, right?
Of course, there are technical complexities that come with accommodating very high penetrations of variable inverter-based energy sources like solar, especially in these large interconnected power grid systems like we have in the US and China.
Right.
But the good news is that there's a ton of research and development going on,
Okay.
and a lot of investment being poured into finding solutions to these grid integration challenges.
And it's not just about the grid level technology, right?
No, it's also about strategies for managing the natural fluctuations of solar power generation.
So what are some of those strategies that the paper highlights?
Well, one key strategy is combining PV with wind power,
Okay.
because wind resources often have a different, seasonal and daily pattern compared to solar.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you a more stable overall renewable energy supply.
Makes sense.
Another strategy is using dispatchable generation sources like hydropower with reservoir capacity.
Okay.
That can fill in the gaps when solar output is low.
Makes sense.
And then expanding the interconnections between different geographic regions.
Mm-hmm.
That can help to smooth out local variations in solar and wind generation.
Right, because the sun isn't shining everywhere at the same time.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't forget about energy storage.
Right.
Advanced energy storage technologies are becoming increasingly important
Yeah, storage is absolutely crucial.
for decoupling energy supply and demand
Mhm.
over different timescales.
Right, so we're not just talking about PV and battery storage anymore.
You okay?
The thinking has evolved.
Okay.
The focus is shifting towards a more holistic approach
Yeah.
that incorporates flexible demand response and sector coupling.
Okay, so paint a picture for me. What
Yeah.
does that look like in practice?
Okay, so imagine using pumped hydro storage facilities to store excess solar energy generated during the day for use at night,
Okay.
or utilizing solar electricity to produce green hydrogen through electrolysis,
Yeah.
which can then be stored and used in transportation or industrial processes.
Okay.
Or think about smart buildings with heat pumps that can be controlled to maximize energy use when solar output is high.
Uh-huh.
And electric vehicles can act as distributed energy storage assets,
Well, right.
absorbing excess solar power when it's available and potentially feeding it back into the grid when needed.
It's like a whole interconnected system.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about leveraging all these different technologies and strategies to create a truly flexible and resilient energy system.
So to model all of this accurately, we need to be constantly updating our energy system models, right?
Absolutely. We need to be using the latest cost data for all relevant technologies.
Uh-huh.
We need high temporal resolution to accurately model those balancing mechanisms.
Yeah.
And we need to fully integrate both direct and indirect electrification technologies into these models.
And the paper makes a point that when you do all of this, when you take into account all of these factors,
Yeah.
cost optimization models consistently project very high shares for PV in future low-carbon energy systems.
Right, which suggests that this transition isn't just about environmental necessity. It actually makes good economic sense, too.
It's like the numbers are adding up in a way that they haven't before.
Yeah, the economics of clean energy are becoming more and more compelling.
That's really exciting. Now, it's also interesting to see how the perspective on renewable energy, including solar, is evolving even among those organizations that have been, historically more measured in their projections.
Yeah, that's a really significant development.
Organizations like the IEA, the IPCC,
Right.
which have, traditionally been more cautious in their outlooks for PV growth.
Yeah, they've historically presented more conservative scenarios.
They're now increasingly advocating for a much more rapid scaling up of both solar and wind power.
They're recognizing the urgency of the situation.
And the paper emphasizes that this accelerated deployment is a crucial and no-regrets pathway to achieving substantial greenhouse gas emission reductions in line with climate targets.
It's a really important shift in perspective.
It is, but the paper also makes it clear that even with this massive push for renewables,
Yeah,
we still need to be actively pursuing other climate solutions in parallel.
absolutely. It's not an either a scenario.
Right.
We need a multi-pronged approach.
So we need to continue research and development into things like carbon dioxide removal technologies.
Right, CDR is still an important part of the equation.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit now
Okay.
and talk about the manufacturing side of all this.
Yeah.
75 terawatts by 2050. That represents a colossal manufacturing challenge.
No doubt about it.
Does the paper address concerns about the PV industry's capacity to meet that demand?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It acknowledges the potential concerns about, the sheer volume of production that would be required,
Yeah.
the need to maintain and further reduce costs,
Right.
the importance of ensuring high levels of quality and reliability,
Uh-huh.
and the need for a sustainable and secure global PV supply chain.
Yeah, all at a scale that we've never seen before.
Exactly. It's a massive undertaking.
But the paper also points to the remarkable track record of growth and innovation that the PV industry has already demonstrated.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this industry has a history of exceeding expectations.
Like the consistent rapid doubling of annual PV production and cumulative installed capacity.
Right. For decades, the industry has been doubling production and capacity roughly every 3 years.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is, and based on current trends,
Yeah.
especially in polysilicon production,
Mm-hmm.
we could realistically reach an annual production rate of 1 terawatt by 2028 or even sooner.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And the paper also highlights the incredible growth rates observed in the Chinese PV supply chain in the first half of 2022.
Yeah, I remember seeing those numbers.
Some segments were growing at rates between 45 to 137% annually.
That's just phenomenal.
It's really unprecedented.
And of course, all this growth has been accompanied by substantial reductions in manufacturing costs.
Yeah, the cost of PV modules has been following a classic learning curve,
Hmm.
with approximately a 24% decrease in cost for every doubling of cumulative production.
Which just makes solar power increasingly competitive with traditional energy sources.
Yes, it's becoming more and more affordable all the time.
But beyond just expanding existing manufacturing processes, the paper really emphasizes the critical role of ongoing and rapid innovation.
Absolutely.
Right? We can't just rely on doing more of what we're already doing.
Right, we need to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
So what are some of the key areas of innovation that the paper highlights?
Since around 2010, the PV industry has undergone a significant transformation.
Okay.
It's evolved from being focused on incremental component-level cost reductions
Uh-huh.
to a much more dynamic industry that's really focused on minimizing the levelized cost of energy.
So it's a more holistic systems level approach to innovation.
Exactly.
Okay.
And technological advancements are being developed and adopted at an accelerating pace.
Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure. So there's the introduction of hydrogenation techniques to improve silicon material quality,
Okay.
the widespread adoption of diamond wire sawing for wafer production,
Uh-huh.
the shift to multi-busbar module designs,
Okay.
the implementation of half-cut cells to reduce electrical losses, and the continuous trend toward larger silicon wafer sizes.
So it's a whole suite of innovations across the entire manufacturing process.
Exactly.
And the progress in silicon PV cell technology, like the development and commercialization of Topicon cells, that's been incredibly fast.
Yeah, Topicon technology has moved from the lab to mass production in a remarkably short time frame,
Like, how long are we talking?
about 5 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
It is. And similar advancements are happening in thin film technologies like cadmium telluride PV.
Okay, so it's not just silicon-based technologies that are advancing rapidly.
Right. There's innovation happening across the board.
And all of this innovation, the paper argues, is being facilitated by strong industry clustering and collaboration.
Exactly.
So these geographically concentrated industry clusters in regions like the US, Japan, Germany, and China.
These hubs of innovation where companies, researchers, and government institutions are all working together.
And that collaboration has been a key factor in driving down costs and accelerating deployment.
Absolutely. And standardization has also played a major role.
Right.
Getting everyone on the same page with processes and components.
Exactly. That helps streamline manufacturing and reduce costs.
And the paper mentions that the cost of establishing new silicon PV production lines has been decreasing by around 50% every 3 years.
Yeah, largely due to advancements in manufacturing equipment.
So we're getting more efficient at producing solar panels.
Much more efficient.
And then there's the ongoing trend of increasing silicon wafer sizes over the past couple of decades,
Right.
which has led to significantly more powerful cells and modules.
Yeah, we've seen a substantial increase in standard wafer dimensions, coupled with an average annual efficiency gain of about 0.5% absolute.
So Bigger wafers and more efficient cells,
Exactly, and that translates directly into higher power output per cell and per module.
which helps reduce overall system costs because you need fewer modules and less balance of system components.
Right, it's all about squeezing more power out of every piece of silicon.
Okay, so it's clear that the PV industry has made remarkable progress.
Yeah. But the paper also acknowledges that it's at a critical juncture
Right.
as it strives for a truly sustainable and reliable multi-terawatt scale deployment.
It's about proving that we can scale up sustainably.
Yeah, it's not just about building more solar panels, it's about building them in a way that minimizes environmental impact.
Exactly.
And the paper makes a distinction between short-term supply chain considerations
Yeah.
related to materials like silicon and glass,
Uh-huh.
and the longer-term potential for actual material scarcity.
Right. So in the near term, we need to be mindful of potential bottlenecks in the supply chain.
Okay.
But the bigger challenge is ensuring that we have enough of the critical materials to support terawatt scale deployment in the long term.
And one material that's specifically highlighted as a concern is silver, right?
If silver is a key component in current silicon PV technology,
Yeah.
and it's not exactly the most abundant material on the planet.
So how much silver are we talking about here?
Our current industrial silver consumption in silicon solar cells is around 15 milligrams per watt of capacity.
Okay.
But to achieve truly sustainable multi-terawatt deployment, that usage needs to be reduced to below 5 milligrams per watt.
Wow, that's a significant reduction.
It is, and the PV industry currently accounts for about 10% of global silver production.
So finding alternatives to silver is a high priority.
Absolutely. There's a lot of research and development going on to find ways to replace silver with more abundant materials like copper or aluminum.
Are there other materials that could pose potential scarcity challenges at the terawatt scale?
The paper also mentions indium, which is used in some advanced silicon heterojunction solar cell technologies.
Okay.
The availability and the environmental impact of materials like indium need to be carefully assessed.
Right, we need to think about the life cycle impacts of all the materials we use.
Exactly. We need to take a holistic view of material sustainability.
So it's good to know that major PV manufacturers are already taking steps to reduce their environmental footprint.
Yeah, they're making significant strides in lowering their energy and water consumption
Uh-huh.
and reducing their carbon dioxide emissions.
So what are some of the strategies they're employing?
Well, they're continuously improving manufacturing efficiency.
Okay.
They're adopting larger silicon wafer sizes,
Uh-huh.
increasing the scale of production batches,
Okay.
and utilizing more energy-efficient and resource-efficient manufacturing equipment.
So it's a multifaceted approach to reducing environmental impact.
Exactly. They're optimizing every stage of the manufacturing process.
And one significant achievement has been the reduction in the amount of silicon feedstock required per unit of power produced.
Right. Thanks in large part to the adoption of thinner steel wires for slicing silicon ingots into wafers.
Okay.
And advancements in solar cell architectures now allow for the use of thinner silicon wafers without sacrificing performance.
So we're using less material to produce the same amount of power?
Exactly. We're getting more efficient with our resource utilization.
Now, to give us a sense of what this ambitious 75 terawatt goal could look like in practice,
Yeah.
the paper outlines a simplified growth scenario. So
Yeah.
walk us through that scenario.
Okay, so the scenario project's reaching about 75 terawatts of cumulative installed PV capacity by 2050,
Okay.
with a steady-state annual production rate of about 3.4 terawatts per year, being achieved around 2037.
And that model assumes a typical 25-year module warranty.
Right, which means that even after annual installations stabilize,
Uh-huh.
the total installed capacity will keep growing,
Okay.
eventually reaching around 85 terawatts near 2060.
When retirements start to equal new installations.
Exactly.
Okay, so the key takeaway here is that to achieve this,
Yeah.
the PV industry needs to maintain an average annual growth rate of around 25% over the next critical years.
Which is ambitious, but it's consistent with the historical growth trajectory of the industry.
So we've done it before.
Like, we know it's possible.
But it's going to require a concerted effort.
Absolutely.
This isn't just about solar panels. This is about transforming our entire energy system.
It's a systemic change.
Innovation, deployment, sector coupling all need to advance rapidly in a coordinated manner.
Yeah, it's about connecting all the dots.
And the paper really drives home the point that solar PV is not just an energy technology.
It's a strategic technology.
That's fundamental to combating climate change and enabling sustainable global development.
It's about building a better future for everyone.
And that has huge implications for the global PV supply chain,
Absolutely.
which needs to become more geographically diverse and delocalized
Right. We need to reduce our reliance on any single country or region.
to mitigate risks and ensure a more resilient and reliable supply of this critical technology.
Exactly.
And we also need to ramp up research and development in areas like eco-design and PV module recycling.
Right. We need to be thinking about the entire life cycle of these technologies.
From cradle to grave.
Exactly.
And the paper stresses that focusing on extending product lifetime, ensuring high reliability, and conducting thorough life cycle assessments
Yeah.
will be key to minimizing our environmental impact at the terawatt scale.
It's about maximizing resource efficiency and minimizing waste.
And as we move into this terawatt scale era of production, continuous innovation focused on material sustainability and reducing embedded carbon and energy in PV manufacturing will be absolutely essential.
We need to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And that includes increasing material circularity through things like recycling.
Right, closing the loop on materials.
And responsible scaling means minimizing embedded energy and carbon at every step of the PV value chain.
It's about making solar PV as sustainable as it can be.
And as we deploy more and more PV, the energy used to manufacture it will become cleaner, creating a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, a virtuous cycle.
So we can't forget about the continued importance of improving solar module efficiency.
Right. We need to keep pushing the limits of how much power we can extract from sunlight.
To drive down costs and minimize land use.
Absolutely.
And as conventional single-junction silicon solar cells approach their theoretical efficiency limits, research and development into lower-cost tandem solar cell structures will become even more critical.
Right, combining different materials and technologies to break through those efficiency barriers.
So things like CDT or perovskites paired with silicon.
Exactly. Those are promising areas of research.
And the paper also highlights the advantages of certain thin film module technologies like CDT, which require less energy to produce and have lower greenhouse gas emissions. So it sounds like we'll need a diverse mix of PV technologies to meet the multi-terawatt demand.
Right, a portfolio of solutions.
And of course, we can't forget about energy storage and green hydrogen to fully unlock the potential of all this solar power.
We need comparable progress in those areas.
So things like pumped hydro storage, electrolysis for green hydrogen production, all of those need to scale up rapidly alongside PV.
And we need to find innovative ways to integrate these technologies.
So things like building integrated photovoltaics.
BIPV, that's a really promising area.
Direct charging of EVs during peak solar generation.
Right, aligning energy demand with supply.
And agrivoltaics.
Yeah, using land for both power generation and agriculture.
It's all about creating a more intelligent and interconnected energy system.
Exactly.
And the paper also points out the crucial role that PV can play in meeting the growing energy demands of emerging economies.
Absolutely.
As those economies develop, they're going to need a lot more energy.
And solar PV is a perfect solution.
Clean, affordable, and reliable.
And scalable.
Exactly.
And it's not just about electricity either.
Right.
The paper also highlights the importance of PV for the large-scale production of green hydrogen and hydrogen-based e-fuels and e-chemicals.
Which are essential for decarbonizing sectors that are difficult to electrify directly.
Exactly.
So the message is clear: the next decade is absolutely critical.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
We need continued strong policy support.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Policies that reflect the true cost of climate change and air pollution.
Right, we need to internalize those costs.
And incentivize electrification.
And we need to invest in research and development.
Across the entire spectrum of PV technologies and related energy system components.
We need to keep innovating.
And we need to foster robust and diversified global PV supply chains.
Right, to ensure a secure and reliable supply of this essential technology.
So things like streamlining permitting processes for solar installations. Offering incentives for daytime EV charging. Establishing ambitious net zero energy goals for buildings.
All of those are important steps.
And it's good to see that many countries and regions are already moving in this direction.
Yeah, there's definitely momentum building.
India, the US, the EU, They're all taking steps to strengthen their domestic PV supply chains and encourage more distributed manufacturing.
It's about creating a more level playing field.
And ultimately, the paper underscores the need for long-term and credible policy commitments to ambitious climate change mitigation goals
Right.
to provide the market certainty that's needed to attract those massive capital investments.
We need a clear signal from policymakers that they're serious about transitioning to a clean energy future.
So to sum it all up, the message of photovoltaics at multi-terawatt scale, waiting is not an option, is both simple and profound.
Yeah.
We need to scale up global PV deployment rapidly and sustainably.
And we need to do it now.
A sustained global growth rate of around 25% per year over the next decade,
Yeah.
putting us on a path towards 75 terawatts by 2050.
That's the goal.
It's ambitious but achievable.
And absolutely necessary.
We've got the technology, the economics are increasingly favorable, and the stakes couldn't be higher.